Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you're doing it with, why you're doing it in the first place, and all that other stuff. I just don't care. I'm just glad you are doing it here with me. Legal Vices on the return of Maritime Monday. And we know what that means. It means one of two things. It's time to do something we have not done in a long time. And that is to don the official Maritime Monday hat with the lint on it. Get out there, lint. All right, we are back in the saddle again. That feels good. That feels good to put on the old Maritime Monday hat on that I have. All right, well, that is the first thing. The second thing that has to happen, the number two thing, is to let you all know that this is going to be a continuing feature. That's right. It's back for good until something happens to make it not a Maritime Monday. So welcome back. Welcome aboard for this new and exciting installment of Maritime Monday. And for those of you who particularly seemed like a particular Scotsman in chat was having trouble reading the pinned notice at the top. I was not asleep. I just said I'm going to need about 5 more minutes to finish preparing because there's a lot of moving parts to this, a whole bunch of moving parts. So let me unpin that message. There we go. We are here now. It just took a little bit longer than I thought it would to set up. But I am so glad you are all here for Maritime Monday. And today we're going to be talking about the wreck of the sailing ship Glenesslin. The Glenesslin is on the menu today. And perk up ears, all of you Scottish people in chat, because our story begins in the shipyards of Glasgow. So all you Glaswegians or those in the general vicinity, this is where we're starting today. But before we do that, we have all the background information, all the the housekeeping stuff before we even get to the background information, the housekeeping information. 168 people here for the return of Maritime Monday and 110 likes. You're doing better, but still 58 of you haven't done your job. Get down there and smash that like button. Do it. And YouTube did a little purge, it looks like, on the subscriber number. So again, I just remind you, if you haven't subscribed, please do me the favor and subscribe to the channel. And if you are subscribed, because YouTube is just doing one of their struggle sessions, just make sure you're still subscribed. Seriously, just double check, just look down there and make sure you're still subscribed, because some of you aren't after yesterday. Like a decent number of you aren't after yesterday. But just a reminder to do that and hit the like button. Of course, if you're here, you'll like it. So there we go. Let's just get that out of the way while we're thinking about it. Gotta turn the fan towards me. It's a hot day today here. All right. And take our like and subscribe poll, basic poll, simple poll, just so I can see where you are. Good to have Maritime Monday back on the menu again. Simple yes or no. 3% of you said no. Well, looks like you 3% are losing. So yeah. And we have a couple of chatty things to do before we dive into the story. So let's bring this on up. Swan Lake Lady Mom says hi. Hi, Mom. Swan Lake Lady. We'll talk about. Okay, in case I don't remember to talk about Swan Lake Lady here, she gave me an awesome gift. She gave me a gift of a map of like Oregon coast shipwreck sites, and although this story begins in Glasgow, Scotland, it ends off the coast of Oregon. So I was actually looking on the map, comparing it to the other sites that we've covered. But so that thanks Swan Lake Lady, and tell Mom hi again as always. Right. Yeah, see, Ginger Gems have been unsubscribed from many channels over the last week. It just seems to be one of those things. Every now and then, YouTube just does a purge where like, we think this person needs to go through a struggle session. So that's what they've decided to do to me. But we will weather it as we have weathered all of them. And well, maybe as the ship today, the Glenesslin, maybe didn't weather the maybe storm that may have happened or not. Little foreshadowing there, just in case. The mystery of, first of all, what was the weather like? Was it good weather? Was it bad weather? All right, hit the like and subscribe buttons. Hit the then take our poll and then pay attention. We're gonna get underway here. And the video, we do have a video for today. The video is again from the amazing site of the Part-Time Explorer. We've got some cool stuff. Part-Time Explorer is a great site, and I seriously hope that someday we'll be able to do a collaboration together. We've sent a couple emails back and forth, but the Part-Time Explorer, I'm going to put the link up in the description after it's done. But please, if you remember after this, go over to the Part-Time Explorer, like this video. I think you did it about a year ago. About a year ago. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you leave a comment saying that the Legal Vices sent you. As a matter of fact, I think I'll put the link to the video right here in chat right now. So there you go. It's in the chat now. So if you go there and just like that video, leave a little comment saying you saw it on Legal Vices channel, and it's an awesome video. And I do recommend that if any of you have not subscribed to the Part-Time Explorer's channel, you do so immediately. He's got a bunch of cool maritime stuff. We've done a couple of videos of his, and this I think will be the third one we've done. And he not only does maritime stuff, but he does land-based stuff. So there's some cool stories. I really like the channel, and please just do all the right things so that we continue to be in the good graces of the Part-Time Explorer and all nearly 400,000 subscribers he has. All right, with that out of the way, I think we can begin our story. All right, let's see. Where do we want to begin this story? We do have Doggo Cam here, and we do need to read our chat because we are on our way officially towards unleashing the emotional support potato pig dog cams at the Hundy mark. But Tracy Hartig has joined us as the newest member of the Clean and Sober crew. That happened about 6 hours ago. I hope you're here, Tracy, enjoying the Maritime Monday show, which we do every Monday, unless we're doing trials or something like that. Aaron with the first real full-on super chat of the day. Finally, the Maritime Monday we've been needing. Well, I'm glad that you've been needing, and I'm glad this is the one you've been waiting for, because this is the one we've got. All right, so here we go. Right. Thank you so much for the $2. That only leaves us $98 away from the emotional support potato pig dog cam. But we won't be grifting that. That'll be Friday. Friday's when the real grift happens. That's the effing Friday. All right, this story here. We're going to start this story, like I said, in Glasgow, Scotland, and where it's going to end up on the coast of Oregon. So one of the it's one of the Oregon coast's more famous shipwrecks. I mean, not due to it being recent or anything, but just due to kind of the ship that's involved and the length of time that's been since the accident happened. But oddly, this long time ship accident, still, it's just exactly what happened and who's at fault remain a mystery. It's still a little bit controversial what happened, and it all happened in and near this tiny little Oregon coast town of Manzanita. So if any of you happen to be from the town of Manzanita or thereabouts, this story you might be familiar with. And this happened so long ago that Manzanita wasn't even really a town yet. But let's bring up, just so we have a frame of reference, let's bring up a little map here that shows us where we are. Which one do we want? We want this one. There we go. So you'll see that like it's northwest of Salem and just about due west of Portland. Let's zoom in on that a bit. So you can see it's right over here, this tiny little village over here, just due west, Manzanita, with Bayside Gardens, and I have what I can only believe to be pronounced Neocani Mountain highlighted, because that's where the shipwreck happened. The ship just sort of plowed into the seaward side of this Necahani Mountain. Hey, Ezra, last day on Lake Superior. He looks like you've been having fun. You got to have been having fun, right? Right, Urza? Urza Art Supplier has got to have been having a I'll get it right one of these times. Urza, I'm sure you've been having a great time, right? It looks like it. Well, anywho, so the ship hits this mountain in this tiny little town, which is now known as Manzanita, which is basically due west of Portland. Portland, Vancouver, that area. Vancouver, Oregon. So you got like just like right here. See, you got Vancouver, Washington there. You got the Portland. You just got go straight west, and you're right there. All right, so that kind of gives us a reference for where this is happening. Well, Jennifer, you'd think it would be hard to plow into the landward side of a mountain, but you'd be surprised the things that I've seen. All right, let's continue our story, shall we? So the ship was built in Glasgow, Scotland in 1885. It was a 1,818 ton steel vessel. Steel was sort of the shipbuilding material of the day. It had replaced wood quite some time ago. But still 1,800 tons of steel, being 260 feet long, was a rather large sailing vessel. It was a pretty big sailing ship. And the ship in this incident, the Glenesslin, was coming up from Brazil, and it was bound for Portland, Oregon. So almost made it. It almost made it to Portland, but it didn't quite make it. Now it was essentially empty. It only had sand for ballast, just to keep it lower down in the water, and it was going to pick up some goods in Stumptown. Stumptown is where it was going to pick up some goods. Well, the Glenesslin itself was kind of a famous ship, but not everybody knew it was a famous ship at the time. Now let me get rid of the map. We don't need the map anymore. But my handsome mug should be enough, right? I agree. Stumptown is, by the way, for those of you like Stumptown is another nickname for Portland, Oregon. So that's just a thing. It's a nickname for Portland, Oregon. I don't know. There's some theories why, but it's basically due to logging and stuff like that. It's rather unpleasant. But anyway, let's get back to the story, shall we? Logging stumps like that, it was basically they just cut down all the trees in that area in the Pacific Northwest. So it was called Stumptown because there was nothing but stumps around there. But that's not important to our story. So the Glenesslin, it was its largest ship, 1,818 tons of steel, 260 feet long. It came to fame in 1902, in happier times, about 11 years before the accident we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, the Glenesslin had earned the world speed record for a 1,000-mile journey under sail. It had sailed down from Portland to Port Elizabeth in South Africa in only 74 days. Like a wild number. That was just an absolutely insane speed. It took the world's record for a voyage under sail of 1,000 miles. And interestingly enough, that record, 1,000-mile voyage under sail, still stands today. That record is still in place. The Glenesslin still holds that record. Now after she became famous for this speed setting record, that's when she sort of kind of came into a little bit of fame. And local papers began covering her port calls. Usually just sort of the mundane business stuff that had arrived in Portland with so much cargo, and it's going to take on this, that, and the other cargo, and heads just letting them know that, hey, this famous ship that set this speed record is visiting Portland. Now, but there was one interesting deal that it arrived in Portland with pesticide used to kill all the rats aboard to prevent bubonic plague. So that they were looking to report kind of anything they could about this ship. Now, for 20 years, for 2 decades, this large, very, very fast windjammer was the pride of the C.E. DeWolf and Company fleet. But right around the turn of the century, right around the time that it set this speed record, things started to go a little bit sour. And it wasn't just for the Glenesslin, but also for all other sail-powered ships. The problem was steam power. Steam power hadn't been much of a threat on the seas at that point. You would get a lot of the steam-powered paddle wheel ships and stuff on the rivers like the Mississippi. But as far as ocean-going vessels were concerned, it wasn't, steam-powered vessels weren't that big of a threat until about the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. But by the time the early 1900s were there, the engines and drive systems had gotten efficient enough. They were exploding a little bit less than they were in the mid to late 1800s. But also, the steamships were a little faster, I guess, a little safer. And there just came a point when there was really no real reason for shipping companies to own sailing vessels. Sailing ships are a lot slower than steamships. They're less predictable. They're less flexible. They're much more subject to the whims of Mother Nature and weather. And they were really only good if they were running with the wind or kind of running across the wind. Going against the wind, they essentially sucked compared to the steam vessels. Now, although the age of steamships was rising and the age of sail was dying, you could still, in places like Portland and other ports, you could still kind of look out into the water on a nice day or an evening and still see a few of the great ships with the full sails, just cutting their way through the water, of course, with the permission of Mother Nature. And we'll talk about the crews later, but under the presumed competence of the crew. Well, that's where we pick up today's story. Running Against the Wind. Good song, David Nelson. Right. So we're gonna pick up the video here. We're gonna pick up the Part-Time Explorer video, and we'll kind of pop in and give a little more detail and a little more explanation as things go on. So let's bring up the video here, and there we go. And begin. And I Can't Remember has just celebrated being a member for 8 months. Thank you so much for the support. I Can't Remember. As always, great to have you here. Is there cannibalism in the story? As again, unless you consider the ship trying to eat the rocks, cannibalism, no. But there is mystery afoot. There's mystery afoot here, and that's what we're going to look at here. So again, this is from the Part-Time Explorer. Here's the link again. Make sure you give the video a like, his video a like, and let him know that you saw it on Legal Vices, and it's the best video you've ever seen.
Fully rigged sailing ship crash against.
His graphics are just ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, the amount of work he and his team go to bring these types of animations is just great.
It's a cliff in the middle of daylight on a perfectly clear day. Well, that's what happened to the Glenesslin.
Came ashore at Neocani Mountain in broad daylight and clear weather. Still not clear what caused that, but lots of theories. People that witnessed it said it was almost as if they intended to go ashore because the ship was in full sail and it just crashed into the mountain.
If you frequent the Oregon coast, chances are you've seen a framed copy of one of these photographs of the Glenesslin. Still,
we'll look at some of these photographs later.
Hard on the rocks at the foot of Neocani Mountain. Despite how iconic these photographs have become, the story of the wreck of the Glenesslin hasn't been explored much beyond a few cursory paragraphs. I'm going to make an attempt to bring this oft-photographed but rarely discussed ship back to life, exploring her successful career and unfortunate demise. But more importantly, I want to see if I can get out to the actual spot that she wrecked, and see if anything at all remains of this 110-year-old shipwreck.
I bet she's scattered all over this beach.
Sailing ships have a romance. Open ocean, seeing far-off ports. Recounting the story of the wreck of the Glenesslin captures this sense of romance and adventure beautifully. So sit back and enjoy this old sea yarn of a beloved ship that outlived her era.
Dramatic music.
She was built in 1885 by Thomas Royden and Company. Now, Thomas Royden and Company was a long-standing shipbuilding firm in Liverpool and had been in business since 1818. Some of their other ships include the Asiatic and the Tropic, two ships that were acquired by the White Star Line in the 1870s. They also built the SS Lesbian. That's a real ship. I didn't make that one up. The Glenesslin.
Okay, there you are. I'm just waiting for y'all to get this out of your system because it took me a while. See, that's the interesting thing, Joe, is some reports say she was built in Liverpool and some reports say she was built in Glasgow. I went with Glasgow because he went with Liverpool. All right, there we go. It's Flux's ship. Lol. Oh my. Laughter. Captained by one-eyed groundskeeper Willie, who was lesbian. More laughing faces. Yes, chaos coordinator, the SS Lesbian. Captained by Captain Flux, of course. Yes, OMFG, the SS Lesbian. Credit where credit is due. Flux has to be proud of the ship. Sailing to Lesbos often there. You getting it out of your system yet? All right. Hashtag Dykes. Right. So are we all, have we all got our childish jokes out of the way? Are you? Okay. Let's go. Okay, Adara the Wholesome, and then we're gonna get on with it. Avast me hearties, says Adara the Wholesome. Where be me grog for old Cap'n Grog, for I be the captain of the Lesbian. Me and Flux, me first mate, we roam the southern seas, especially the moist southern sea. Right. Is Flux even here? Anyway, hey, we have a Flux sighting. Yes, Flux. Yeah, if you need to go back a couple of minutes there, Flux. We've been talking about the SS Lesbian, and now I did search for the SS Lesbian. There are 3 separate ships that I was able to find called the SS Lesbian. Nothing super dramatic happened to any of them. It seems just a couple of them didn't make it through World War II, and another one just kind of did its thing. So, all right, now that we've got that out of our system, we can get back to the story at hand. All right.
2 ships that were acquired by the White Star Line in the 1870s. They also built the SS Lesbian. That's a real ship. I didn't make that one up. The Glenesslin was the last sailing ship built by that yard, and she was sturdily built at that. It's said that her hull was unnecessarily thick, built of heavy gauge iron. She was 260 feet long, nearly 40 feet abeam, and had a hold that was 23.5 feet deep. Her tonnage was registered at 1,645. She was built for C.E. de Wolf and Company, registered to Liverpool and designed for cargo service, specifically with the treacherous winds of Cape Horn in mind. More often than not, she was sailing in and out of Portland, Oregon, one of the key harbors at the time on the American West Coast, bringing in goods from Brazil and South Africa from around the Cape. The Glenesslin was one of literally thousands of clippers and windjammers sailing around the turn of the last century, and given how little we know of her, she seems to have simply blended in with the crowd. However, there were a few things about the Glenesslin that stood out. For one, she was a fast ship, and one of the most reliable of the Liverpool sailing vessels. Her first voyage was under the command of a Captain J. Firth, and it brought her from Cardiff, Wales, down to Algoa Bay, South Africa, in an astonishingly quick 52 days. The Glenesslin would ultimately have a 27-year career. Not bad for a clipper at the end of the sailing ship era. But the majority of that career, a full 17 years of it, was under the command of a Captain Thomas B. Pritchard. Pritchard was first mate of her under Captain Firth and was finally appointed to master in 1889, a full 4 years after her maiden voyage. He was a masterful sea captain with his own investment in the ship, and he came from a family of mariners. In fact, his brother captained a similar vessel, the Haddon Hall, and the two of them held a small reunion in 1901 when both the Glenesslin and Haddon Hall were due in San Francisco around the same time. The Glenesslin arrived.
That's kind of a cool story. I mean, you think, the families that go out back in the old days there, especially these sailing ships, they would be on different schedules in different parts of the world. So here you've got, just imagine how fun it is when you see your family after a few months, maybe a year or 2 or 3 or 4, but this is a meeting of 2 brothers that have been sailing ships. They've been captaining ships, and they haven't seen each other for 20 years, and they just happen to be in the same port at the same time. Just kind of a cool thing.
First, anchored, and dropped off its cargo. The Haddon Hall, however, was running late. The ship stayed there, waiting a full 2.5 weeks. Now, Captain Pritchard knew that this wait time was eating into his next voyage, but he didn't mind. He was eager to see his brother, whom he had not seen in over 20 years. The Haddon Hall finally came in after 17 days, and the 2 brothers had a small party. The story was special enough that the San Francisco Call even did a feature story on it. Now, this is likely the first time that Mrs. Pritchard met her brother-in-law, as Captain Pritchard's wife often accompanied him aboard the Glenesslin on these long voyages. Now, I don't know if it was Captain Pritchard or the Glenesslin herself, but one of them was lucky. Several mishaps befell the Glenesslin during her career, but almost always she and her crew came out virtually unscathed. In 1894, a fire broke out in the hold of the Glenesslin while she was moored in Brooklyn. There were 50,000 casks of kerosene on board, and despite all of it going up, the ship survived and carried on.
Which is something you wouldn't find obviously happening in a wooden hulled sailing vessel. 50,000 casks of kerosene go up there. You're not saving a wooden vessel, but an extra thick hulled steam sailing ship. There you go. Boosh McFadden is a new member again. Thank you so much, Boosh. And I can't remember is also, although I can't remember, has been a member for 8 months. I can't remember is also a new member somehow. Adara the Wholesome says, why don't we talk about how deep my ship's hull is? No, hull, Hull, not hole. We're not talking about how deep the SS Lesbian's hull is. We're talking about how deep the hull, Hull, of the Glenesslin is. I can't take you kids anywhere. All right, so this is where we are. Psychosis 29, the lesbian made port in P-Town, fitting. I wonder how bright this is. LC Merritt, I'm sure every fan of the lesbian wants to know this very important detail. How is her trim? Waka waka. Chill. I seriously can't take you people anywhere, can I? Shame. It's like a bunch of 12-year-olds. But that's why I love you guys. All right, let's go.
To fight any fires on board, Glenesslin had fire buckets like this one to haul on board water and douse the flames. This one was pulled from the 1913 wreck of the ship and is currently preserved in the Columbia River Maritime Museum in Astoria, Oregon. It was 1901 that appears to have been the big, eventful year for the Glenesslin. Not only was it in August of that year that the brotherly reunion occurred in San Francisco, which I had previously described, but the first voyage of 1901 was almost a tragic one. En route to Geelong, Australia, she encountered a storm one night. A wave broke over.
Is Geelong, Australia a real place? I just asked because it sounds Australian, but it also sort of sounds fake. All of you Australians have to tell me if Geelong is a real place, because it sounds like Terry Pratchett's book, The Lost Continent, which is about Australia, but it's not really about Australia. But it sounds like one of the Australian towns that he mentioned that Terry Pratchett mentions in his book, the Australian town of Did You Bring a Beer Along? But anyway.
Her and washed away a sailor named William Anderson. A cry went up of man overboard, and a life ring was thrown after him. The ship was stopped, and the sails were adjusted. No easy task in the wind, rain, and darkness. And the vessel navigated back to the scene of the incident. A boat was hastily prepared, and under the command of a steward, William Griffiths, was sent out after Adamson. Despite taking a full hour to find him, the boat picked him up, clinging to a life ring. To guide the boat back in the darkness, Gleneslin's crew lit blue flares on the deck.
See, that's like way
cool. They even fired rockets into the air. Slowly, against the wind and the rain, the boat returned, and Adamson, although drenched, was okay.
That took balls.
The Columbia River Maritime Museum has a life ring from the Glenesslin in its archives. This beautiful piece is similar to the one that saved Adamson.
See, I didn't notice that. The life ring has Liverpool on it, so scratch that first part. I guess that's decided because that's all right. But then again, it just may be the port of registry. We don't know. Still, it's interesting that there's it hasn't been that long, but there's still discrepancies in where the ship was built.
Or possibly, although unlikely, could be the very same one. Only 3 weeks after the incident.
Then again,
William
it might not even be from the vessel.
And on the same voyage to Australia, a sailor in the rigging, a Mr. Morgan, fell 70 feet from the topsail. He would have hit the railing, and that would have finished him off. But 3 feet above, he bounced off a rope and was flung into the sea, pretty much unharmed.
But scared out of his damn
Captain
mind.
Pritchard ordered the ship turned about immediately, and a sailor went up into the masts to keep a visual on Morgan. A boat was launched and found Morgan before he was lost. Glenesslin was a speedy ship, and under Captain Pritchard, she was the ship to beat. On one voyage, one of Captain Pritchard's first, he sailed from Portland, Oregon to Algoa Bay, South Africa. The ship was fully loaded and heavily laden, And despite that, the Glenesslin did this journey in record time, having beaten the standing record by 10 days. In September 1901, while the Glenesslin was still in the San Francisco harbor after the reunion with Captain Pritchard's brother, she was preparing to depart for Queenstown, Ireland. It was noted that several other ships in the harbor were also preparing a voyage to Queenstown, Ireland. 2 of these ships belonged to the Peter Iredale Company, a name that you'd recognize if you've seen my video on the wreck of the Peter Iredale.
Which is kind of interesting because I was literally in a toss-up between which 2 stories to do, either the Glenesslin or the Peter Iredale, the sinking of the Iredale. I couldn't decide which one to do, so I did this one, and we get a mention of the other one as well. So at some point in the future, we'll be doing the Peter Iredale as well.
And these ships were rivals of the Glenesslin. They were the Foildale and the Davonby, similar vessels to the Glenesslin and carrying similar cargoes. A wager was placed as to which ship would arrive in Queenstown first. It became such an event that 5 other ships were added to the racing lineup. The Moldova, the King Edward, the Celtic Monarch, the H.B. Babcock, and another ship whose name no one wrote down. Enthusiastic bets were placed in both North America and Europe. The Glenesslin actually ended up leaving behind schedule, giving the other ships a 2-day head start. Despite this, the Glenesslin ripped through the seas, arriving in port 17 days ahead of the second ship.
That's pretty damn good.
In March of 1902, a young apprentice named Gerald Jones joined the Glenesslin while she was laid up in Liverpool. This would be his first voyage at sea, and he would have plenty of stories to relate about his time aboard the ship.
That's a cool
After saying goodbye to his mother, the ship departed for Melbourne, Australia. Sailing out the River Mersey, she passed several large ocean liners, including the White Star liner Celtic. Jones fit right in.
Mexican Vader, bad cock and lesbian. What kind of weird adult video is this? Oh, well, you know, we do what we can. Oh, chat, what's wrong with you?
Learning his duties, singing sea shanties, and fully overcoming seasickness thanks to the ship's mate, a Mr. Holmes.
This is kind of a cool and interesting story. I would not recommend trying to overcome seasickness in this particular manner, but at least anecdotally, it seems to have worked for one person.
Well, when the seas became rough, Jones became queasy, and even
hate to tell you, part-time explorer, my hat is way cooler. Just saying. Love your channel, but my hat's cooler. Sorry.
Well, when the seas became rough, Jones became queasy, and even
here we go. Here is the seasick remedy. The remedy for seasickness.
Even though it was his watch, he slipped below deck to take a quick nap. Well, Holmes found him and dragged him topside. And when Jones complained that he was seasick, Holmes took off his hat, filled it with seawater, and forced Jones to drink every last drop. Well, Jones promptly emptied the contents of his stomach over the railing, and he says he never experienced seasickness again. Well, that was Jones's very first watch at sea.
Anecdotally sound,
Watches
but don't
on
try
board
it.
the Glenesslin, just like all similar ships, were signaled by a bell on the deck. This bell is the one used aboard the Glenesslin, now on display in Astoria, Oregon. Jones also related another fun story of the Glenesslin. The summer before, when the ship was in San Francisco and Captain Pritchard met with his brother, Pritchard also socialized with another sea captain. This was the sailing ship Fifeshire. And just like Pritchard, this captain would bring his wife along on his voyages, who at the time in San Francisco was pregnant. Jump ahead to early 1902. On Jones's first voyage, the Glenesslin came upon another sailing vessel in mid-ocean. They were sailing in opposite directions towards each other when, on the poop deck, Captain Pritchard and his wife realized it was the aforementioned Fifeshire. The two vessels passed each other a few hundred feet apart. The captain of the Fifeshire was on deck as they passed and held up a little baby, simply shouting to the Gleneslin's crew, "It's a girl," to which the crew of the Glenesslin gave back a cheer.
Aww. Yay.
Tommy is not a girl. Tommy is a boy. It's a touching little human story about life at sea, which is very often overshadowed by stories of tragedy and wrecks. But we do wreck. Don't worry, we're getting to that. From Melbourne, the Glenesslin sailed to Victoria, British Columbia, and in its approach by Cape Flattery encountered one of the thickest fogs her crew had ever seen. It was so dense that they truly had absolutely no idea where they were.
All right, we've got to address chat again. That's a hell of a prop. Yes, holding up your child is you. Lol, poop deck. Is it really called the poop deck? Etc. Etc. I think they pooped on the poop deck. Yeah, Tommy's a boy. That was pretty funny. All right, for all the poop deck questions, yes, it is actually called the poop deck. It's the little raised area of the deck at the back of the ship. It's not where you poop, people. I can't believe I even have to explain this, but you know, it's not a common term, I guess. No, Amber Heard was not on the deck. Stop it. I'm trying to educate you people here. It is called the poop deck after the French word for the back of the ship. You know, it's la poupe. You know, it's the back. You know, it's that's it. That's the exciting story behind it. Get it out of your system now. It's just from the French word le poupe. So Do I dare tell you that the French term, the etymology of le poupe in French, is from the Latin, the Latin root word, which is unfortunately poop piss? Do I dare tell you that? Yeah, just thought you'd want to know that. It's yeah, the etymology le poupe comes from the Latin word poop piss. Just thought you should know. Shall we continue with this story before it gets too far out of hand? No, Bifrons, I'm serious. I know. Don't tell me to grow up. I'm giving you a French and Latin lesson, and you're telling me to grow up just because you can't handle the poop deck coming eventually from the Latin word poop piss. I think that's on you people. That's on you, not me, your teacher. I'm imparting wisdom and knowledge, and you're just la poop pissing on it. So, all right, let's go.
They knew that they were running approximately parallel to the shore, but not that they were creeping dangerously close. It wasn't until they heard a dog barking and a bicycle bell that they realized, turning the ship hard over and clearing back out into the channel.
Okay, so how is that? It's in a fog, and you're on a ship.
Victoria.
So you're on a ship. You're just sailing along. You go, okay, I know we kind of got to be a little close to land, so we need to be careful. And then suddenly you hear a bicycle bell. That would be a warning that you really, really need to get away from shore. That's if you happen to be on a ship and you hear a bicycle bell, you know you are too close to shore.
Contracted a charter to sail fruit from Portland, Oregon to East Africa. Glenesslin sailed down to the Columbia River and anchored off of Astoria, awaiting a tow into Portland. Glenesslin was hitched up to a stern wheel riverboat, the Harvest Queen, and was towed into the city. Now, those of you who have seen my Peter Iredale video will already know what press ganging is. It was the vile practice of luring sailors from an anchored ship away from their duty.
Well, that's it's part of the press ganging is not just taking them from other ships. You may remember we talked a lot about this press ganging, this Shanghaiing, during the wager videos that we did. We even discussed it, Danny, on direct with our discussion of press ganging, where they were, in order to fill people on the HMS Wager, they were literally pulling 80-year-old people back in a day when life expectancy wasn't anywhere near 80 years old. They were pulling out 80-year-old retired veterans who were dying of illnesses, who had missing limbs. They were stealing them from veterans hospitals, and actually some of them were in such bad condition they had to be raised in their hospital beds onto the ships. It's basically just kidnapping people and pressing them into service on a ship. Well, that's part of the problem we've got here. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about this later on. When we're talking about the possible causes of this accident, we're going to talk a little bit more about the press ganging, the Shanghaiing that's going on.
With the promises of better work for better pay. And then they would take them back to some boarding house, have them rack up a phony debt, and then force them, often by physical threat, to sign on with another ship to pay off that debt. Now, of course, the sailors were going to be going to sea anyway, but this was a way for con men on land to steal their wages and pick up a little extra cash from the ship's officers who were paying them almost a ransom. The press gangers would also frequently take young men from bars or even off the streets and force them into these ship crews without even giving them a chance to tell their families where they're going. Now, Portland and Astoria, Oregon were notorious for this, but this was a practice that was terribly common all throughout the world.
Exactly.
Well, here in Portland, the Glenesslin lost most of her deckhand crew to these press gangers promising better work. So now the officers of the Glenesslin were forced to hire a new crew from these same press gangers. Despite this, the ship sat in Portland for both Thanksgiving and Christmas, celebrating both holidays heartily before sailing back into the sea. Outbound to East Africa, apprentice Gerald Jones made friends with a young German sailor named Fritz. They swapped stories, and they often had afternoon tea together.
Oh, that means
around the middle of the...
All right. They swapped stories and they had afternoon tea together. Wondering if they might have swapped a little spit together too. Who knows?
Pacific, the Glenesslin encountered a sudden storm, and the order was shouted for the sailors on watch to climb the masts to bring the topsails in. It took a full hour to do so, for the sails were flapping hard in the wind. Fritz lost his footing in the storm and fell the 70 feet hard onto the deck. Fritz was lost and was buried at sea the next day, with Captain Pritchard presiding. This is the only death that I'm aware of aboard the Glenesslin, and she still arrived in port, smashing the record between Portland and East Africa. Apprentice Gerald Jones left the ship after 2 years in 1904. Moving on to steamships. His accounts were detailed and thorough, but this was only the start of his career. He moved up in life through White Star Line ships, serving in both World Wars, and becoming staff captain of the Georgic, the Aquitania, the Queen Mary, and the Queen Elizabeth, eventually taking on the title of Commodore of Cunard White Star.
That's a pretty damn good pedigree there. That's a pretty damn good resume.
Later, when the Glenesslin was in Port Adelaide in 1910, Gerald Jones happened to be signed up with a ship that was anchored in the same port. He truly loved the Glenesslin, and he came aboard her for a stroll down memory lane, walking her decks, and even falling asleep for a little bit in the topsail. Captain Pritchard left the Glenesslin in 1905, as the age of sail was rapidly coming to an end. The ship fell into obscurity and rarely turned a profit after Pritchard's departure. The ship became a tramp, wandering from port to port, picking up just enough cargo to pay her crew. By 1913, the Glenesslin was under the command of a Captain Owen Williams.
All right, this is where today's story picks up. I gave you a little bit of history. The Part-Time Explorer gave you a lot of history. And now we're going to get into the accident itself. No, Bush. No, different ship.
Williams was a bit of a drinker. He was the kind of captain who always had a drink in his hand, but still managed his ship competently. He had been at sea for 26 years, and in all that time had never had a single accident under his command.
Good for him.
The final voyage of the Glenesslin is vague. There's a lot of holes in the story, and it seems
there's a lot of holes in the ship too.
Simply didn't feel like talking about it. I'm going to walk you through what we do know. Glenesslin arrived in Santos, Brazil, dropping off a cargo of cement. On May 28, 1913, she departed Brazil, carrying nothing but leftover cement from that shipyard as ballast. The plan was she would round the Horn of South America and move north up to Portland, Oregon, to pick up a shipment of grain before moving south again and east to deliver that shipment to Liverpool. All went well until the ship reached the Cape. Here, the winds were exceptionally troublesome.
Now, remember again, the wager, that's where the wager died, was going around the Cape there in South America. So again, it's a very, very dangerous sea any time of year for sailing ships, because relatively speaking, the distance between the tip of South America and Antarctica is not that far. So you have these giant oceans that are feeding water into the other one. And so it sort of bottlenecks the water, and it creates this amazing, just basically perpetual storms and bad weather in ridiculously high waves, tens of meters high. So it bottlenecks all the water from the ocean and squeezes it around between South America and Antarctica, and it causes havoc to these ships. And losing ships around the Cape of South America down there at the very bottom it was just a ridiculously common occurrence. If you want to hear about nearly an entire fleet being lost, go back and watch the HMS Wager shows that we did.
Normally, Glenesslin was able to navigate through here, but for one reason or another, the ship simply couldn't. And Captain Williams decided to take the long way around, turning the ship back, sailing around the world in the opposite direction, south of Australia, and cutting northeast across the Pacific. What should have been a 3-month voyage was now a 4-month one. As they approached the Columbia River, which would take them to Portland, a bad storm was brewing behind them. It was still far off, but Captain Williams knew that it would be a race against time to get the ship in to the safe harbor. As the ship sailed through the night, Gleneslin's stern lamp shone off the aft railing. It was initially designed to burn oil, but was converted to electricity later in the ship's career. Williams stayed up late through the night to get a fix on the ship's position using a sextant. Now, doing so requires visible stars in the sky, and with the storm brewing, he would stay up for long periods of time, waiting for the breaks in the clouds. By the next day, he was exhausted from lack of sleep, and after assessing the situation around midday, decided to take a brief nap in the chart room. After downing another drink and asking the second mate to wake him at 2 in the afternoon.
All right. Well, this is where I just want to kind of add a little bit here. So again, this was October 1st of 1913, 111 years ago. Pleasant, gorgeous day. By some reports, not by all, which adds to the confusion and the mystery of this incident. Let me put this aside for a minute, and again, which it vastly increases the chances of me forgetting to put the screen back on when we start the video, but I'll try to remember that. So, this massive, by the scale of the time, British square rigged sailing vessel, the Glenesslin, as we're going to see here, it just slowly turned and plowed straight into the side of the mountain. It's a mystery to everyone at the time. I mean, conditions were crystal clear by some reports. Waters were calm, maybe, and it was only 2:30 in the afternoon. Now, in charge of the ship, we already mentioned Captain Owen Williams. He's a seasoned captain. He mentioned a bit of his drinking proclivities, but he had a spotless record. And there was 20 people in his crew, including the first and second mate. Both the first and second mate, the first and second officer, were in their 20s. Now, this is what we're going to be looking at here. If something like this had ever happened before, nobody at the time could remember it. Why would a full-sized windjammer and crew just simply sail into the side of a mountain. As you know, just as if it wasn't there. They were just sailing straight into a mountain. Why? If the ship were in some kind of trouble, wouldn't its crew drop the sails, drop the anchor, do something like that at the very least? There's some very nice beaches. There's some very nice soft beaches in Oregon. Why did they run aground if they had to on what is essentially a very narrow beach made of gigantic rocks? Well, who knows? Who knows? Nobody knows for sure. But when the vessel hit the mountain, we get a very large group of locals that are coming out to rescue the crew. Let's get the video up to that point. And we're going to talk about this particular incident he's talking about. We're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail when we get into the legal proceedings involving the crewmen. I told you, I knew it. I would forget. I knew it. I am an idiot. I caught it. Yeah, I see. I caught it before you guys caught up with the tape delay here, with the video delay. So I'm there. I'm here. I caught it. I caught it just moments before your comments brought it up. See, that's why I don't normally do that. That's why I normally just leave it like this, but I just assumed y'all wanted to see my gorgeously handsome mug a little bit closer. But apparently, no. Just for video's sake, we'll pop it back here a little bit.
When the captain went below, the weather was perfectly clear, favorable winds, and the ship was a few miles offshore. His first mate, Lawrence Howard, was off duty, and his second mate, John Coalfield, was at the helm. Neither of these men were particularly experienced, and they were both quite young. While Captain Williams was laying down, the ship entered a thick haze. The wind shifted and was now driving the ship toward the rocky cliffs of the Oregon coast.
That's like Monster Island.
At the helm saw that they were getting closer to the cliffs, and he seems to have frozen. In fact, the cook allegedly told him, "Hey, John, you're gonna wanna turn that way." To which Coalfield responded, "Mind your own business." Coalfield did actually call the captain.
Now, this alleged story about the cook saying, "Hey, you might want to turn a little bit to avoid smashing into the mountain," and the second officer telling them, just to go out and shut his head and mind his own business. There was a reason. There may have been a reason for that, which we'll talk about later. Why would that happen?
Twice, as it was now around 2 o'clock.
So he tried to wake up the master.
Actually called the captain twice, as it was now around 2 o'clock. But the captain told him to give him another half hour and call him at 2:30. Coalfield had been at the helm and looking at this clock, watching the time, and waiting to wake the captain from his nap. Coalfield allegedly then called the first mate and asked him what he should do. And Howard came up on deck, looked at the cliffs, and felt there was no danger and told him, "You're doing fine." He went back below. The ship had now turned toward the east and was riding straight toward a mountain on the coast known as Neahkahnie Mountain, just north of the town of Manzanita.
Surfing Bird, new member. We've got our new member, and for being a new member, you definitely get the ship's bell. Thank you very much, Surfing Bird, for being the newest member of the Clean and Sober crew. Much obliged, much appreciated. Thank you very, very much. Let's get back at it.
The second mate shouted out, "We're getting really close here, guys." The first mate came up on deck, and now realizing how close they were getting, he rushed back below to get the captain. The captain and the first mate had returned on deck, but by then it was too late. An interesting phenomenon occurred. The ship had entered what is known
Now, this is one of the explanations, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in just a bit.
as a wind shadow, an area that the wind simply cannot reach. In this case, it was blocked by the mountain and cliff outcrops. The Glenesslin, not having any wind, was a dead stick. The crew had absolutely no control over her steering.
Or did she?
She ground hard on the rocks at the foot of the cliffs. Captain Williams sent a sailor below to check the damage, and he reported that within minutes the ship was already half flooded. Glenesslin rolled to starboard as it settled down onto the rocks. Just as the ship impacted, it finally cleared out of that wind shadow, and now, on the rocks, was getting buffeted by wind coming in off of the ocean, and that wind pinned the ship hard against the coast. There was no moving it. All hands were on deck by this point, and a line was run to the rocks from the bow in order to use a bosun's chair to get them to land. In the meantime, the starboard side lifeboat was readied and loaded. The moment it got into the water, it was torn to pieces by the waves.
Well, that's less than ideal. It's less than ideal to have your lifeboat just torn to pieces.
Thankfully, everyone in the boat managed to pull alongside the hull of the ship, around the bow, and haul themselves ashore using the bow line. The rest of the people aboard the Glenesslin used the bosun's chair to get off the firmly lodged ship. Everyone made it to shore uninjured, with most even taking their personal belongings with them. And Captain Williams was the last to leave the ship.
Finally, after however hell long that we've been doing these Maritime Mondays, we finally get to a story, one of the very few stories where the master is actually one of the last people off. But it's always good to hear one of those stories.
The Glenesslin was a full 2 miles north along the beach from the small town of Manzanita, with the crew hiking along the wet rocks of the shore, the same route that I took to get out to the wreck site, but in the other direction.
This is kind of cool. He goes out to the actual site where this takes place. We'll get to that in just a second, and I'm gonna make sure I don't do what I did last time here. So I'm gonna make sure it doesn't happen. So what we've got here with this accident is the people that the locals come out to rescue the crew and to see what's going on. And now, of course, naturally, people want an explanation as to why the Glenesslin crashed, but they didn't really find any easy answers. The crew, interestingly enough, refused to talk about the accident to anybody, and Captain Williams' few words didn't really help anything either. It didn't really cast any light or illumination on what went wrong. He was asked what happened, and he answered, "All I can say is that the boat is ashore and is a total loss." Now, when they asked him who was at the wheel, who was at the helm, who was in charge of navigating the ship at the time, his answer was, quote, "One of the seamen, I don't remember his name." So you have the captain of the ship who doesn't know who was in charge of the ship at the time of the accident, doesn't remember his name, and the only thing he'll say is that the ship is ashore, as you can see, and it's a total loss. And there was some newspaper reports about the shipwreck that are kind of interesting in their detail. There's one article that tells of a man, quote, living on the beach, presumably in some sort of, beach hut, cabin, surfing hut or whatever. He probably wasn't surfing, but you know what I mean. Some sort of hut, fisherman, whatever, living on the beach. Now, he said that he knew something was very wrong as he watched the ship sort of make a beeline for the cliffs. And then also watching were guests and staff of this tavern, the Neakani Tavern, I guess, a hotel and restaurant that was famous for a bunch of decades, apparently. there was some note that says, in fact, the Sand Dune pub has a similar decor in homage to that watering hole. I don't know what that means, but there were people that were watching out through a giant window as the ship just plowed into the side of the mountain. So the small crowd of locals, they run out, they try to render aid, and among them was a guy named Samuel G. Reed. He was the owner of the tavern, and he was apparently some sort of a local legend in Manzanita. So he and others were helping the crewmen out of the ship, and he made an interesting notation that many of them just reeked of alcohol, including the captain. Well, according to the East Oregonian newspaper on October 2nd, 1913, quote, all those aboard were saved with their baggage by shooting a line from the boat to shore, where the line was made fast to the big boulders by S.G. Reed, owner of the Necarny Tavern, with his clerk, Thomas Williams, Walter Kane, and 2 laborers. Well, the problem is, again, they were getting no official explanation as to what happened from the captain or the crew of the Glenesslin. So that's when people sort of started filling in the blanks on their own as to what may have happened. And we'll get back to that story again here in a minute. But let's take a look at the actual location where the accident happened.
So it's the final hours of daylight. The sun is setting right now, and I'm only just getting here.
This would be cool.
I really wanted to come out to this site to tell this story, but I had to drive all the way from southern Nevada. That's a 16-hour drive. Got up early and just made it here in the last 10 minutes of daylight. There's all sorts of scraps of metal along the rocky beach here. Of course, that's not to guarantee that they're from the wreck. Metal could have come from anywhere. But I did notice they started getting far more common as we got down to the wreck site. So who knows, there might actually be a little bit left of her.
We'll keep looking for the wreck in a minute, but I think we're onto something. When Captain Williams and his crew arrived in Manzanita, a local bartender described the captain as being roaring drunk. I don't think he was. He did have a little bit to drink, but he was more likely confused and a little flustered about what had just happened, and of course disoriented. Say what you want about him, but the chain of command remained intact after the impact, and he had a good record up until this point. He also managed to move along the bow line and climb ashore without any trouble. Unfortunately for Williams, though, the legend of the drunken captain running the Glenesslin ashore persists to this day. The courts investigated the wreck and determined that the second mate, who froze and failed to alert the captain in time to take evasive action, was ultimately responsible. His license was suspended for 6 months. Captain Williams's license was suspended for 3 months.
And we're going to talk a lot more about the trial in detail here after the video wraps up.
The first mate was reprimanded. He got away with just a reprimand because he wasn't on duty and not technically responsible for the actions of the crew at the time. Another possibility to consider is fraud. The ship was sailing without any cargo, and the Glenesslin had already been deemed obsolete. In fact, at the time of the impact, her crew seemed like they were already set to abandon ship, with their personal effects already in hand. Now, when Lloyd's Insurance investigated the wreck, they did not suspect fraud, and they disregarded the conjecture that Williams was intoxicated. They agreed that the ship was a total loss, and they sold off the salvage rights for $560. Yes, Captain Williams was punished, and he lost 3 months' worth of wages, but he and his company walked away with a $30,000 insurance payout, or nearly $1 million in today's money.
It was a time when these sailing ships were kind of at their twilight. It was harder and harder for ship owners to get capable crews. You could contract with a steamship that would have less crew and pay less money,
which is what we were talking about at the very
carry
beginning.
More cargo more reliably than a sailing vessel. Speculation that a lot of these boats, it was cheaper to run them aground and claim the insurance loss than to try to sell them or continue to run them. And that may have been the case with Glenesslin.
So did they pull a fast one on Lloyd's Insurance? We may never know. It's believed that shortly after the wreck, the weather cleared and the fog bank dissipated. Well, at least that's what Gleneslin's crew claimed after the locals said that the weather had been clear all day.
Mm-hmm.
Weather reports at the time do indicate that there were some patches of haze in the area, so in our animation, we gave the crew the benefit of the doubt and showed the fog. We do know, however, that the second mates saw the cliffs long before they hit them. Foggy or not, they did have sufficient visibility. While the investigations were being conducted and the salvagers were waiting to arrive on scene, the wreck was guarded to protect it from pillagers. Hired men and local police with repeater action rifles stood watch throughout the day and night over the wreck. Local photographers were allowed out and took plenty of pictures, now iconic in Oregon today, including photographs of the armed guards, bored out of their minds after hours of sitting and goofing around for the camera. Not only are these photographs well known, at least locally, but the Columbia River Maritime Museum has an album of these photographs, along with newspaper clippings made out of canvas from the ship's sails.
That's
It's a unique
cool.
memento of the accidents and now being well preserved. Other souvenirs of the sails were taken, including this piece behind me, featuring an image of the Glenesslin wrecked on Neahkahnie Mountain, block printed onto a portion of original canvas sail. Also in the collection of the Columbia River Maritime Museum is this medical scale, with accompanying medical handbook, believed to have been pulled off the wreck of the Glenesslin before it was lost. Aside from these artifacts, I don't think too much else was saved from her. The man who bought the salvage rights to the Glenesslin paid for it sight unseen. When he finally got out to the wreck, he took one look at it and promptly turned around and resold those rights for $100. The storm that had been tailing the
We'll talk
Glenesslin
about
on
that
her
too.
approach to Oregon arrived a day or two later, severely battering the ship on the rocks, but the ship stayed fast for at least a few weeks. Through the days and through the nights, the wind and the surf pounded the Glenesslin, wearing away at her hull and the rocky foundation it sat upon. On November 15th, a month and a half after the crash, Glenesslin rolled back into the sea, breaking apart.
There you go. Goodbye, ship.
Gerald Jones, who apprenticed aboard the Glenesslin 11 years earlier and was now serving aboard the White Star liner Subic, described that hearing about the loss of the Glenesslin was like hearing the news of the passing of a dear old friend. But where is the wreck? Is it just under these waves? Or is it buried under these rocks? Or has it completely vanished?
That's probably from her. She's said to be long gone, but no, this is a part of her. Likely a piece of hull. The old Glenesslin. I'll be completely honest with you. I didn't expect to find it. I believe everyone was under the impression that she was long gone, and why wouldn't she be? She's been here 100+ years, and these waves, even on a good day, are rough. So it's really surprising to see anything left behind. Part of what seems to be her hull. That's incredible. All right, so what do we got? We have one large piece, another piece here, more in here, a lot more in here. I bet she's scattered all over this beach. This piece of concretion where the rust has actually solidified with some of the small rocks.
The Oregon Coastal Highway Route 101 was built right on top of the cliff that the Glenesslin hit, with the debris and rocks from the construction burying much of what was left exposed of the vessel.
You mean drift
Well,
metal?
the sun was setting
Drift
and
metal
the
isn't a
tide was
thing.
rising. It was time to leave the old ship behind.
But likely came from it. I mean, there'd be no other reason for giant steel panels to be there.
Actually, as I'm walking back along the beach and the sun is going down, I found yet another piece of the Glenesslin. You can see bracing, you can see riveting on it, and it's actually quite a large piece.
The coast of Oregon is littered with hundreds of
you made me
shipwrecks. Some of them are still visible today, such as the famous Peter Iredale and the forgotten Mary D. Hume, both wrecks that I've visited and dedicated videos to on my channel. Others, like the Glenesslin, are almost completely gone and nearly lost to history. The Columbia River Maritime Museum in Astoria, Oregon is working to preserve these stories and has a fantastic gallery of artifacts related to these shipwrecks. Items recovered from the wreck of the Glenesslin are prominent in their displays. The museum is well worth a visit. The Glenesslin may be the photogenic book cover, if you will, of Oregon's maritime history, but the story itself
You're reaching.
is little more than
You're
a
reaching,
footnote.
Daily Quick Bites.
If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it around. Check out
Please
my
do that.
Patreon as well, and as always, a special thank you to my supporters on
Here's his
Patreon,
there. We'll give him his
especially
Patreon
Marlo
members.
Perez, Kelly Black, Kaiser Wilhelm II,
What?
Zach
Kaiser Wilhelm
Richards,
II
Donald
is one of his
Anderson,
supporters?
Cody Henricks,
Cool.
Joan Haynes, Sean Kimball, Glenn Biddiscombe, Stephen Schwankerts, Gabriel Colomb, Nick K, RGB, Tara Molokar, Keith Holland, Miles Garrett, Rob M, Amos Mayhew, Corey Andrews, Nicholas Masella, Cole Tannick, Sophie Baber, Rob, Oliver Chinchen, John Maluski, David Watipka, Tiffany Raridan, Mad Time Media, Nathan Gutierrez, Max Metcalf, David Littlejohn, Sean Sahi Frazier, and Nikki Chan 92.
All right. Again, the link for that is here in chat. The link for the original video without all my comments and interruptions. Please go over there and make sure you give a super special like to this video and a comment saying Legal Vices introduced you to the video and this is the best video ever. So make sure you do that so we can get a little street cred here. But that's the story and sort of a little view of the actual location shown by the Part-Time Explorer. Again, fantastic channel. But now I want to, as soon as I can clear my throat, you guys made me laugh in the middle of a drink. Excuse me. Right, there we go. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about some of the likely explanations as to what happened, possibly how things occurred. Now, before we do that, let's clear up a couple of these comments that I had just noted. Where Nick Starro said, "Hey Nick, how you doing? Jeff, what is a maritime slang for block and tackle pulley system used on sailing ships to hoist the sails? Why, that would be chock-a-block, sir." Thank you very much, Nick, for that interesting question and comment. And Daily Quick Bites says, "I've seen videos of some containers still afloat, which raises a serious question. If you were trailing a container ship, could you legally salvage the containers if they don't stop the ship?" We should do an episode on salvage. The answer you're going to get from me right now is it depends on a lot of things. But yeah, it's a possibility. We should do a salvage episode because there's some really cool salvage stuff out there from major shipwrecks and things and containers falling overboard and stuff. That could be an interesting story. And again, Surfing Bird became the new member. We mentioned that already. And we have a super chat. Woohoo! First time in a long time we get a super chat. So let's make sure we give Dara the Wholesome. We got another one coming on. Dara the Wholesome, you get the ship's bell. The real SS lesbian. The friends we made along the way. Yes. Thank you for that comment. And AA Ron, who's been a member for 20 months. Yet another awesome Maritime Monday. Thanks. We're not over yet. Don't go anywhere. We're not done yet. We've got 272 people here and 316 likes. Now we're going to get into the theory of some of the things that may have happened. He addressed most of them, but I want to talk about them in a little more detail. But before we do, again, as I just mentioned, 272 people here, now 317 likes. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. It's right there. YouTube is putting us through a struggle session with just determining that large groups of people no longer want to be subscribed to the channel. It's always interesting when you look at your phone and you see the subscriber count, and then you turn your back and you go to get like the water from the water cooler in the office. You come back 2 minutes later, you sit down at your phone, and somehow you've lost 15 subscribers in 2 minutes. YouTube just kind of puts people through struggles. So just, if you haven't subscribed, I would be completely honored and thrilled if you would do me the honor of subscribing to the channel and becoming part of the well, you're already part of the Vice Squad just because you're here in chat, or you're just watching this at some other later time. But become an official member of the Vice Squad by subscribing to the channel. And if you are one of the 77,600-ish people that have already subscribed, just double check to make sure you're still subscribed. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and look at the like and subscribe poll, which is pretty simple this week. Good to have Maritime Monday back on the menu. 4% of you said no. That's like 12 of you. That's like 12 of you have said no, whereas 96% of you have said yes. Well, thank you very much to the 96% of you. I'm glad to be back in Maritime Monday mode. And we're going to keep doing it as long as there's nothing else going on. Mandy. Hello, Mandy. How are you? You get a bell too. The $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Can we do Maritime bingo cards? That'd be rough to make up for every week. Plus, perhaps one of you would take the initiative and make a Maritime Monday bingo card. That would be a good project for someone. Thank you so much, Mandy. It would be too hard of a deal for me to make up an objective Maritime bingo card, plus wrangle it and handle all of that whilst I'm doing the show itself. But hey, if somebody else wants to do it, go right ahead. All right. So as we mentioned a little bit earlier, because they couldn't get any real official explanation from the captain or the crew about what happened, it sort of left people to start filling in the blanks themselves as to what happened. And that led to a lot of speculation about what could have happened. And we've, as I mentioned, the Part-Time Explorer mentioned most of the theories. One of which apparently was the good old demon rum, which is kind of what we have here in the Legal Vices merch glass here. This is a nice rum and tonic with lime. You need the lime so you don't get the scurvy. You don't want to get the scurvy like all the people on the HMS Wager did. All right. Anyway. There was the good old demon rum was one of the potential causes of the accident. They said the captain was, by most accounts, utterly pickled when the wreck happened. Part-Time Explorer doesn't buy it. I tend to think so. Part of his reasoning for not believing that particular part of the story was that he managed to do things effectively and efficiently, but you can do a lot of things by muscle memory, even if you are pickled out of your gourd. So anyway, he had left the ship in charge of the second mate to go take a nap. The onlookers were helping get the men off the wreck ship. They couldn't help but notice that most of the crew members were also drunk, or at least had been drinking. As the newspaper reported that sort of kind of everybody smelled like alcohol. There was a local historian in an article in 2011. Paul Bartles was his name. He told the Cannon Beach History Center that apparently the crew wanted to rid themselves of the whiskey before docking, so they all just kind of got liquored up. But subsequent articles that came out in the Oregon Daily Journal, the Oregonian, the Oregon Capital Journal, the Statesman Journal, in the days that are following the accident, talked about the ship listing and shifting, but not getting battered too badly by the waves. But there were several holes in the ship, and the fact that it was in this weird spot where the wind was blocked, and thus couldn't move on its own. It was declared a total loss. Now that's what he was talking about when he was talking about the wind shadow. That little area, it's referred to as a standing wind shadow. And what that is just like in a particular spot like that. This was just inside of the place next door called Cape Falcon. It's like if you're in a big windstorm and you go behind a building or a dumpster or whatever, and it blocks the wind. That's essentially what this mountain was doing. It was creating a pocket where there was no wind. It was a refuge from the wind. So if a sailing ship gets into this pocket where the wind is being blocked by the surrounding structures, then it's essentially a dead ship. There's no wind, and that's literally the one thing that a sailing ship needs to sail as a ship. And if there's no wind, it's just dead, and it's impossible to have any type of meaningful control over the ship. What happened to the crew? Did they get punished? We'll get to that here in a minute. We're getting to the possible reasons. Then we'll get into the legal part of it here in just a bit. So, it's not impossible for the ship to come around anymore and to get out of the pocket. The helm just doesn't really respond. You're just drifting. And so it's possible that the ship got into this standing wind shadow, and it became becalmed, and then it just drifted onto the rocks, where in a sort of cruel, ironic twist, the winds picked back up and pinned her onto the reef. And that would also explain why, as you saw in the pictures, no one had made any move to drop the sails. They were at full sail when they smashed into the beach. Perhaps they were hoping to catch some sort of breeze, some sort of stray winds that would allow them to bring around and to bring the ship around and to sail away and avoid the cliffs. That's one possible explanation. But I guess one of the most compelling explanations for the wreck was the age of both officers. Now, this is where we're going to talk more about the press ganging that was mentioned earlier. Yes, the crew had whiskey on the rocks, Alex Kane. Yes, they apparently did, or at least rum. But they didn't have Legal Vices merch. Click down on the merch thing. Now, I make zero money off the merch. I'm just saying it's just there if you want something ridiculous in your house. So, all right. Both of the officers, the first and second officer, were 22 years old. They're barely adults. Now, 20 years before the wreck, if you had suggested hiring a 22-year-old, essentially boy, to be the chief officer or the second officer of your ship, especially a famous world record setting sailing ship like the Glenesslin, you would have been laughed out of wherever you were. If you're in a bar and you start talking crap like that, they'd throw you out of the bar. But by the time of the accident, by around the 1910s, it was actually very common for sailing ships to have really, really young officers. Well, there's a reason for that. One, perhaps the biggest reason, which is the primary cause in the other, to give birth to the other reasons, is that it was really hard to find people that wanted to work on a sailing ship. Because remember, we said this is when they're starting, most of the ships have gone to steam-powered ships. Oh, we have an incoming! We have a super chat from Moxie Dame, the greatest Moxie Dame you'll ever Moxie Dame. Jess, how you doing this morning? Hooray for Maritime Mondays. Don't forget to like the stream, you scallywags. And don't forget to, if you don't know Jess, hopefully she'll be making an appearance on our F It Friday this weekend. But get on over to Moxie Dame's channel and subscribe to her. She's one of my faves to watch at work. Today we were watching her and her streaming partner break down a particular episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation that's one of my faves. Thank you, Jess. Good to see you here. Back to our story. What was I talking about? What the hell was I talking about? Nobody really wanted to work because this was, like, as I mentioned earlier, the time when they were shifting from sailing ships to steamships. Everybody wanted to work on the steamships. Nobody wanted to work on the really, really difficult sailing ships. So basically it was just hard to find people. And the difference in the life of a crew member on a steamer versus the life of a crew member on one of these windjammers was night and day, and really only people that had no alternative, no other working prospects at all, would sign up to serve on a sailing ship. Now that's where where people were becoming victims of Shanghaiing and press ganging that was being talked about earlier came in. They would literally lure people off of other ships, sometimes outright kidnap people and press them into service. That's how they were manning the ships. It was always a part of the scene, but it had become much more important in making up a crew of a sailing vessel in the early 1900s. And I guess you could say it's a direct result of this kind of behavior. There was not a lot of discipline. The people, they tended to lack discipline. And I mean, it's hard enough to find people that wanted to work on a sailing vessel. So, I mean, you screw around, you act in an undisciplined manner. What are they going to do? Fire you? They need you there. So the crew knew that they could get away with a little bit more than they would be able to get away with on, say, a steamer. Well, it's not much of a different situation with the officers on these early 1900s sailing vessels. The sailing ship officers I mentioned tended to be very, very young, ambitious people who, they were given a choice. Basically, if they wanted to be a seaman, if they wanted to be on a crew of vessel, they kind of had two choices. They could just be a low-ranking member of a steamer, or at the same age, they could be the chief officer of a sailing ship. So, those that were really ambitious and really highly motivated, they would tend to go for the tougher spots on the sailing ships, because they would be higher ranking, higher status positions than just like, one of the able-bodied seamen that would be on a steamer. And so there's a lot to be said for this, but they would earn their stripes aboard being chief officer, second officer, third officer of these sailing ships. They'd earn their stripes there, and then they would move on to the steamer fleet, and then they would be replaced by the next group of youngsters that this highly ambitious group that wanted to make a quick mark for themselves, quickly rise up the shipping ladders, so to speak. Denise Sell says, I thought that the younger sailor was to get experience before moving up to get their own ship. Guess I'm wrong. Well, see, that's what we were just talking about. You had these two paths. If you were an ambitious person that wanted to become an officer, wanted your own ship, you could either start out at the very bottom, deck scrubber of a steamer, or because it was so hard to find officers for the sailing ships, you could start at or near the top of the crew. So that's why we have these two 22-year-olds who were chief officer and second officer of the Glenesslin. So they start at the top, and it's a much quicker route into the steamer ships, and then eventually they would become captain of their own vessel. So they would use this difficult life as an officer on board a sailing ship to sort of launch themselves and catapult themselves faster up the ranks. Well, although that's admirable, although it's good that you're ambitious, good you want to quickly rise up through the ranks, this kind of a system sort of guarantees that you're having a lot of inexperience in the ship's command structure. And that leaves the captain. Who are the captains of these old sailing ships at the end of the sailing ship era? Possibly we could say the 1913 was past the end of the sailing ship era. The captains are usually the lonely, old, salty, crusty sea captains that you see on the movies and your stereotypical. They're just the has-beens of the shipping industry. They're the ones that are surrounded by this obstreperous and undisciplined, incorrigible crew members. The hotshot little shitty youths that aren't going to be listening to your commands. You've got absolutely nothing in common with. They're the ones that are talking about the glory days of shipping. You're hunting for whales. So they're just sort of the washed up people, the ones that could have been a pro if they hadn't have been hated by the high school football coach. That kind of the glory days. They're done. So those are the captains of the ships. They tended to be that type of person. And what do you do? What do you do when you're just this salty old, crusty old guy who can't relate to anybody? You're not making money anymore. You've been left behind by the times. Well, you might take a cup of rum or 10 to make it all better just for a little while. Just a little nip. Well, apparently Captain Williams had been answering the call of the rum earlier the day the ship was wrecked, or so the story goes. But now remember, we talked about right at the very beginning, we talked about how because of the increased presence of the steamships on the ocean, there was simply no need for any ship owner to own or operate a sailing ship. That wasn't entirely true. There is one reason that was alluded to in the Part-Time Explorers video. There was one reason you would want. Well, there was one reason you would own a sailing ship at that time. That's because you can't sell it. That's why you own it. You can't sell it, and you can't afford to replace it with a steamship. That's why you would own a sailing ship in 1913. So that because of situations where you can't sell it because nobody wants to buy it, and because you can't sell it, you don't have enough money to buy a steamship. There was a lot of these old sailing ships that are still sailing around and operating. But they're just obsolete, and nobody wants to put cargo on them because the steamers are faster, more reliable, safer. Well, the Glenesslin, of course, was one of these old ships, and she hadn't made a profit in years, barely, again, as was mentioned in the video, barely making enough to pay the crew. Well, luckily if you happen to be the owner. If you happen to be the owner, of which the captain was a partial owner, I'm not sure what his percentage was, but I believe he was close to the owner of the ship. I don't know. But luckily for them, the owner gets a nice fat insurance check. And so you can replace the old money-losing sailboat with a shiny new steamship. Well, this raises the specter of another possible explanation. You can't sell the ship, it's not making a profit. What do? You commit insurance fraud. They talked about that. I want to talk about this in a little more detail again. Insurance fraud probably is the first thing that most people would think about, and probably did think about at that point in time, why a perfectly good obsolete ship would just run itself onto shore. That's probably one of the first things they'd think about when trying to understand what had happened to the ship. Well, I have to say that if that was the plan, if this accident was actually planned as insurance fraud, it was executed perfectly. The Glenesslin, it crashes into the rocks. It tears a gaping hole in the steel hull. It kind of makes it impossible to refloat it off the rocks. It's almost at full sail, and it's just stuck on the rocks because the sails are there and it's being just pushed into the rocks. It continues to be there on the rocks until it breaks up. So Additionally, the shore was close enough that it's easily reachable by a line. You can throw a rescue line, and nobody's going to be killed. Nope. Hell, you mentioned that they used the bosun's chair, which is essentially a chair that they just move across from land to ship and ship to land. So I would say that most of the crew probably didn't even get wet, except for the ones that like fell over the side or they're on the lifeboat that broke up. So, I mean, it sounds like a perfect situation for insurance fraud. Everybody gets off. They have time to get their own personal belongings. Most of them stay dry. The ship is just in this perfect location. So, yeah, there was no cargo. Exactly. Bush McFadden mentions there's no cargo. That would have been a whole other can of worms. Exactly. So, yeah, I think if it was insurance fraud, it was very, very well executed. And again, which sort of lends to the story. Remember, it was only the crew members that were saying it was foggy and the seas may not have been really great. Everybody else was saying the weather was nice and clear the entire day. And also, again, remember what was said earlier, once the ship was on shore, Captain Williams and his officers refused to tell anyone what happened. The only thing Captain Williams would say is, well, it's ashore and it's a total loss. And I don't remember, some crewman was in charge at the time. I can't remember who it was. So that makes me all the more suspicious that it may have been actually insurance fraud. And I'm sure it made more people at the time fairly sure it was insurance fraud as well. And Ike, what's up? The Ike Australian. Is it common for ships to have young officers? Oh, it is still common for ships to have young officers. I was a second officer at 24. Most go through either military or merchant cadet programs. I did a combination of the two. Well, that's different than the way it was back in the early 1900s, when it was just people that would literally have no experience at all that wanted to fill the crews. So now they're younger because they're qualified more easily, going through maritime academies and things like their ROTC and going through the Navy, things like that. Are now the officers tend to be young because they're qualified. When back then it was just young because there was nobody else to do it. But congratulations to you. Making second officer at 24 is still pretty damn good. Aussie Overlord pushes microphone in device's face. Any comment on the Series 1, which collided with the Singapore-flagged Hafnia Nile on Friday, causing both ships to catch fire, then fleeing at a blistering 15 miles per hour? No comment, because this is quite literally the first I've heard about it. But thank you very much for bringing that to my attention. I wish you would have brought it to my attention before Maritime Monday. I don't know. I'm not familiar with it, but thank you very much for bringing that to my attention. Hayden, you're a good man. And if anybody out here that's watching, any of the 238 of you that are watching this have not subscribed to Aussie Overlord, you should really, really do that. Well, we've talked about the insurance fraud. We've talked the possibility of insurance fraud. We've talked about the possibility of drunk captain and crew. We've talked about the possibility of being caught in a wind shadow. There's lots of possibilities, but let's look at the legal proceedings. What did there was a trial. There was a hearing. It took place at the British consulate in Astoria, Oregon. Because it was big British ship and whatnot. What are you doing, Strawberry? Right. So the hearing included a handful of British naval men, admirals, and whatnot in the British consul. The stories, surprising or not, differed a little bit amongst crew members and people involved. One side was second mate Caulfield, who was on watch on the deck. According to his testimony, the Glenesslin was not experiencing the sun and clear skies that were reported that day, but was actually dealing with the fog that we saw earlier. And Captain Williams, he said, left the deck at 12:45 p.m., telling the second mate that he was going to go lay down and he should be called upon at 2 p.m. Well, according to the testimony, when the second mate went down to the captain at the decided time and told him the ship was dangerously close to the shoreline, saying she's getting very close in, he claimed he tried to awaken Captain Williams from his nap at 2 p.m. To tell him this, but they just kind of found him. And this is what he testified to. He said they found him and first mate Harwith essentially too liquored to wake up. That was according to the Oregon Daily Journal. Well, at one point, Williams did eventually make it out on deck. Captain Williams made it out on deck, but by then it was too late to steer the ship away. So when the captain got to the deck, the Neckahaney Mountain was just like straight ahead and gave them no choice but to head directly into it. But on the other side of this story was Captain Williams himself. He claimed he had not been awakened as requested. Captain Williams said that he took a nap after lunch, and when he was woken, the ship was already doomed to crash. And moreover, if his testimony is to be believed, the whole incident could have been averted by one man. We talked about the Chinese cook a little bit earlier in the video. So according to the Oregon Daily Journal, here might be the reason why the cook was told, because the story was that Caulfield, the second officer, was told by the cook that hey, we need to go a little bit further away from shore, and he was told by the cook to, quote, clear out and mind his own business. Why might the cook have been told that? Well, the first part of the quote from the Oregon Daily Journal kind of gives the answer, I think. A Chinese cook testified that he had gone upon the poop deck and asked Caulfield to stand offshore, and that the latter told him to clear out and mind his own business. Could it have been a little bit of racism? The white officers are doing their white officering, and the Chinese cook tells them that they need to do their job better. And they tell the non-white Chinese cook to basically F off and mind his own business. Could have been a little bit of that. The Celestials, as they were called back in the day. They could have been a little problem with the Celestials on board the ship. Sean Rutledge says, have you ever thought about doing a stream interview with what's going on in shipping? Oh yeah, absolutely. That's just kind of, I've been loosely engaged in such an endeavor. But if there's another need, if there's another big incident like the Boston Bridge and whatnot, that will likely, hopefully happen. It would be a fun thing to do. All right, so perhaps that had something to do with it. Would they have taken a white cook more seriously? Perhaps, but I think, the way the Chinese, the Orientals, the Celestials were looked down upon back in the day, there might have been a little bit to that. Well, this unusual scene sort of took place in the courtroom. The judge and one of the lawyers began discussing and hypothesizing about what they would do if they were in the first mate's place. Remember, it was the second officer that was on duty. The first mate wasn't. So they were saying, okay, what would the judge and one of the lawyers, they're just playing hypotheticals with each other, wondering what they would do in the first officer, in the first mate's place. Well, this causes the second officer to go, hey, look, quote, he said, quote, they've got me hung. I see that I shall have to appeal because I see that I am to be made the one to blame. Just like, hey, they're like hypothesizing about what's going on here. I'm screwed. I'm just totally screwed. There was a lot of tedious court proceedings that went on at the British consulate there in Oregon, and it was determined that negligence brought the Glenesslin to its untimely end. The court, having regard to the circumstances that we've discussed, this was their finding. This is a quote here. That the master, Owen Williams, was negligent in his duty, and the court orders that his certificate as master be suspended for 3 months. That the first mate, L.W. Haworth, is reprimanded for not acting immediately on his being notified of the threatened danger, but was not notified in time to save the ship. He wasn't notified in time, so it's not his fault, but he should be reprimanded because he didn't act quickly enough after he was told. And the second mate was acting under orders, but showed great negligence in running so close to shore without insisting on the master coming on deck. And also, when the master did not answer his second call, negligence in not taking matters into his own hands and ordering the crew to wear the ship in the critical position in which he considered the vessel to be. And the court therefore orders that his certificate as second mate be suspended for the term of 6 months. The expenses of the court, fixed at £26, 14 shillings, are approved. Dated Portland, Oregon, this 11th day of October, 1913, Thomas Erskine, British consul. So, what do we take away from all this? Captain Williams, he walked away from this whole debacle with a 3-month suspension. Oh yeah, and that check for $30,000. The court's final rulings made no specific mention of the alcohol. So apparently the officials didn't really believe either side entirely. And, they sort of basically gave the most serious punishment they could to everybody involved. And of course, we've made mention of the sale of the ship. Within days of the wreck, the surveyor for the auction house of Lloyd's, they did an appraisal on the ship. And although it would have been worth $30,000, which is about $1 million in today's money, based upon the insurance check for $30,000, although it would have been worth that, after the shipwreck, the ruined vessel was sold to a salvage buyer, who was apparently planning on doing something with it, selling it for scrap or whatever, for spare parts. He bought it sight unseen for $560. Then he went to see his new purchase. He looked at the wreck of the ship and turned around and immediately sold it for $100, a $460 loss. And as we saw there at the end of the video, parts of the steel hull of the Glenesslin can still be seen rusting around the rocks on the side of the mountain. That's all that remains of what was probably the fastest sail-powered freighter ever built, and exactly what happened that day on October 1st, 1913, will likely never be known. And that's the end of our Maritime Monday show. And let's just take a look at some of these photographs of the accident. Like you said, a lot of people were just allowed to come and photograph the ship while it was just sitting there. So these are some of the pictures. Let's see. Here's another one. Where you go? Here we go. I like this one. The guy's just kind of sitting there looking at the ship. That's a beautiful ship there. It's just, unfortunately, it's run aground. Another one of it closer, a closer view of it on the rocks. Yeah, this picture here. View of Glenesslin from the ocean. So that's it right up there on the rocks. The sails are starting to tear. It's starting to list a little more, but it's just jammed up there on the rocks. And the view from the other side is kind of here. You can see it up here on the rocks. And that is the end of the Maritime Monday show. It's been fun, people, and we almost stretched it out to 2 hours. We came in at 1 hour and 55 minutes. That's good, guys. I got to tell you, it's good to get back to the Maritime Monday stuff. We've been so swamped doing other things, and I'm talking. Some of you may remember that we had my friend on here who is a retired Navy commander to talk about the San Francisco submarine incident. I'm talking to Josh about having him back on to tell some more Navy stories. So hopefully that'll be happening in the next couple of weeks. We've got a couple of other ship stories to come in. Not everybody can be cannibal stories, unfortunately. Silent PS. There's not a lot of cannibal stories out there. I think we've covered most of them. But Commander Chisholm, my good friend Josh, hopefully we'll be back here in the next couple of weeks to tell some stories. Let him tell the stories he wants to tell. We're trying to find a time because he's on the West Coast and it's ass early there when I do these shows. But that's what also makes it nice. He is retired Navy, so he's used to getting up at ass o'clock in the morning. But we'll be trying to do that, trying to do some other things, trying to get some other guests lined up to talk about stuff. But we'll continue with our Maritime Monday, like I said, as long as we can. And I just want to say, Muma, where do we go here? Aha. Mumima says it's good having Maritime Monday. I enjoy listening to Canadian sunken ships or anything built near Newfoundland since I'm from there. Well, we'll have to keep some Newfie stories around. We'll have to search for some Newfie stories. Hey, Ron with the $5. I miss the Maritime Monday stories. It's been too long. It has. We've been so busy doing other stuff. And tomorrow we're going to be looking at what the hails. Probably doing that for Monday and Tuesday. Something in my eye, damn it. All right, there we go. We'll probably doing the what the hails updates on at least Monday and Tuesday, probably in the next week. But Tuesday and Wednesday we'll be doing what the hails. Thursday will be our retro trial, the witchcraft slaying, the witchcraft ritualistic murders, the Donald Hartung trial in Florida from 2020. Friday will be F it Friday. So start saving your shekels, pennies, dineros, your sexy Swedish money and all that for Friday. We're going to be getting together. We're going to be getting a panel together starting tomorrow. That'll take us through the end of the week. KLF says, have you ever looked into the mystery of the Eilean Mor Lighthouse? No, I didn't know there was an Eilean Mor Lighthouse or a mystery surrounding it. Let me see here. Eilean Mor Lighthouse mystery. Oh, there's a movie about it, huh? So there's a movie about it. 121 years ago, when a ship arrived off the small Scottish island of Eilean Mor and kicked off one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. Oh, the Hesperus. Yes, okay. I am familiar with the Hesperus. So this is the story. Okay, all right, cool, fine. A ship especially designed to support and maintain lighthouses. This is the wreck of the Hesperus story, yes. Okay, we will check in the lighthouse story there. Fine. Cool. All right. That's it, peeps. Porcelain Thunder, yes. Yes, there are new court videos involving Judge DeThomas that we need to watch because from what I've seen of them, this is the stuff that happened before the hearings we've already watched, and it makes a lot of sense why the judge was acting the way he was. So it does shed a lot of light on this situation. So we're going to be looking at those starting tomorrow. But anyway, people, thank you so. Alan Walsh can see it from his window. That's cool. That's pretty damn sweet. All right. Hey, that's cool. Might have to have you on as the local expert if we do that. But thank you. Thank you so much, chat, for being here. You all being here as we restart Maritime Monday after a good 2 months-ish hiatus. I think you all deserve a very long, very loud foghorn. Thank you so much for being here. Vice Squad, you rule. Mods, thank you so much for being super moddy and doing your super moddy best as always. Thank you for the super chats, the monthly memberships, the new membership purchases, all of that stuff. And thank you for those of you that just sit here and chat and talk with each other and keep each other entertained and keep me entertained. It's been a pleasure, and we will join you. You will join me, and we'll join each other tomorrow for yet another story. Can't wait to be here for the What the Hails, then our retro trial, then F it Friday, then another Maritime Monday story already. You guys have a great, absolutely smashingly wonderful day. And of course, don't forget that...
Look at me, sure. Look at me, sure. I'm the captain now.
I'm the captain now. All right, peeps, that's it. Thank you so much for everything. Love you guys. We'll see you on the next show. Same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow. Till then, take care. Bye.